Part of many trans and non-binary people's transitions includes counseling or therapy, which can be for a variety of reasons, including getting access to letters that can then grant access to medical transition needs. Just as with most things, there's not only one approach to being a gender-affirming therapist, but today I have the wonderful pleasure of talking with a licensed professional counselor, Devin Pinkston, who provides gender-affirming therapy, so I can get a chance to explore what her approach to therapy looks like. Devin Pinkston received her MA in mental health counseling from Valparaiso University in 2015, has specialized in gender-affirming therapy for the past 5 years at her practice called Identity Insights, and has also served as the president of her local PFLAG chapter for several years. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here, Devin.
Yeah, thank you for having me today.
So I'll just start out kind of big picture. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your life path, and what kind of brought you to the field of mental health?
Sure. So my life, I guess it starts out in Memphis, Tennessee. That's where I was raised. I was born in New Jersey, but moved to Tennessee when I was 6. So grew up there in the Bible Belt of the country, which has its own unique, I guess, challenges and pros and cons to things too. My background personally is both of my parents are mixed, so mixed Black and white. So I feel like that brings about its own, I think, challenges and also privileges as well. So being biracial growing up, I might not have experienced the same type of like discrimination or racism as some of my other like darker skinned friends or peers because of my lighter skin privilege, but it was always something that I encountered. And that kind of shaped a big piece of my life as a teenager and then as a young adult, which I think that piece really kind of shaped my direction in what I wanted to get into in school in particular. So in undergrad, I studied psychology. I really fell in love with that. And I think the first thing that I thought I wanted to do, which I still kind of do now, is I wanted to be a sex counselor. Because I took I think the human sexuality course, and I was like, oh, this is so interesting. This is really cool. I want to have more conversations about this with other students, with potential clients in the future. And that was what I initially got into the field for. And then in graduate school, that was when I kind of honed a little bit more of my specialty at that point.
Okay, wonderful. So kind of speaking to that, what kind of inspired you to go into specializing and work with LGBT clients broadly and, you know, trans and non-binary clients specifically?
I think just being biracial, and I can't speak maybe for, you know, everyone who's biracial or gender diverse, but I think sometimes you feel called to work with other diverse individuals too. And that was what I was looking for in my graduate program. And as you mentioned, I went to school. I don't know if many people know Valparaiso, Indiana, but it's kind of this tiny town in Indiana. I think the town itself doesn't have a lot of like diversity in general outside of the college. But one of my practice sites that I was at, they had an LGBTQ pride group.
Oh, cool.
And that was something that I really like, as I was doing my internship, I really fell in love with the community there. I was like, this just feels like where I want to be with the diverse people I was working with, just the like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like the topics that were being discussed, the openness, the ability to just want to be seen and want to be heard. Yeah. And that was something that resonated with me because I've always just really wanted to be seen and heard in my personal life. So that was kind of the jump off point for me in working with the LGBTQIA community in particular. And then moving out to Colorado, where I'm at now in Grand Junction, that was in August of 2015. I moved out with my partner, who's also a therapist too. We kind of were looking at the area and realized there's a gap in any type of like diverse counseling at all. So there was nothing for people of color, nothing out here for trans or non-binary folks or just other communities. There might have been maybe pockets here and there, but it was nothing that was just readily advertised. And that was something that, again, learning about and feeling called to in my internship, I really wanted to incorporate in the community here.
Okay.
So that's kind of how everything got started for me. Over the past 5 years, it's been a real like growth experience.
Yeah.
Being still one of the only providers, at least in this area. I know in other areas of Colorado, you can just, look online, throw a stone, and somebody's like, here's a diverse practice that you can come to, which I think is awesome. But we are still lacking that over here on the west slope of Colorado.
Gotcha. So I mean, it sounds like through your internship, you kind of found this calling and, you're able to provide these very needed resources in an area where it's just not really there. Just kind of curious, what inspired you to go to Grand Junction specifically?
Nothing in particular. My partner, he had grown up in Indiana, and I just didn't want to stay in Indiana personally, because it just, again, going back to like the diversity and culture, people, like all of that, we both were just kind of looking around the country. And Colorado just seemed very progressive. And we initially were looking in Denver, but realized Denver was pretty expensive and a little bit more competitive with just the job market and the field we're in. So we looked on this side of the state and we're able to find more opportunity here.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So kind of wanted to, now jump into like what therapy with you looks like. So I'm wondering, like, what is the process of, setting up an appointment from like first contact to first session look like for you? And what are some of the things that you do to make it, safe, affirming, and as inclusive as possible, broadly and specifically for people looking to explore their gender identity?
I guess I'll kind of just go through what it looks like for like point of contact first, and then once people get to the office. So I always like to let people know, just in case they're watching this later, you have to be a resident of Colorado to be seen at my practice, or I think anyone's practice unless they're licensed in a different state in Colorado. Right. But we have a couple different ways people can reach out. So the first is a phone call, which for a lot of people, I realize in today's age, that's really anxiety inducing. But that's always an option. And the turnaround time is usually within the same day or 24 hours. We also have an email. I think it's like a little fill out form on the website, and it's the same turnaround time there. If they leave a phone number or just an email, we'll try and respond within the same day or within 24 hours, so long as it's the Monday through Friday. And then the other one that we typically get is referrals from other providers. So we actually get a lot of doctors that are familiar with my practice at this point that will send over referrals saying, hey, we've got a trans or non-binary patient that we don't know how to like serve for the mental health piece, but we know that's something that you can do. So those are the initial points of contact. And like I said, we try and get in touch within like 24 hours at the latest if it's a weekday. And then at the office itself, we just moved to a new space back in May. So previously I was kind of office sharing with like a bunch of different businesses. And now I've got my own little wing, which I think is really nice to have. And we've been able to set it up to just kind of have like rainbows, trans flags, just a lot of pride stuff in the office. I wanted to make it feel homey. I wanted to just make the space feel safe. As soon as somebody walked in, they can just kind of a sigh of relief of, okay, this is a place that I can be myself. Yeah. And then all of our therapists have had training actually at this point. One thing I've always been involved in, and I try and get my other therapists involved in too, are to join some of the like LGBTQIA groups for providers, where a lot of the providers in those groups are trans or non-binary themselves. So we're of the mindset now where we want to learn from people that also have lived experience, because a lot of us are cis providers. And we don't want it to come across at all as we're trying to dictate something. We're trying to gatekeeper, we're just not knowledgeable. So we're always looking for resources there. And just this past year, we've hired somebody of lived experience to be able to train our team. And she's been fantastic. And I think we still got her for another meeting coming up, maybe this month or next month. But we've been working with her since March of this year. And I think that's been a really valuable tool, is to just hear from somebody who's gone through that process, is a provider, and can just give us some more insight about how we can always be and do better. I think that's always been my biggest mission, is to constantly evolve and make sure we're not just staying stagnant.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's super important, to just bring in people who identify with the community. And I feel like, thinking, from my background as a psychology student in psychology, like, that's kind of, strangely, unfortunately, somewhat of a new concept, to kind of incorporate the actual communities we're working with into the work that we do with them. I think that's super important, to make it collaborative, as opposed to like, I'm the expert, do what I say. It's like, yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like a lot of your approach is like, the clients are the experts of their own lives, and you're kind of a guide or a facilitator to help them get what they need.
Oh yeah. Yep. Because our our role is not to, I think the biggest thing that my team and I have talked about this year is the gatekeeping. It's how can we avoid that? And our job is not to gatekeep. It's just to say, if this is just a point of contact you need to move forward, and you're not really looking for anything else mental health wise, then we just want to make that as quick and seamless as possible, so you can continue on in your journey and being you.
Kind of on that note, I'm wondering, what do you do at your practice to kind of minimize the gatekeeping that trans and non-binary people might encounter pretty frequently at other mental or physical health sites?
So I know, I think I was a little late on like learning about this, but there's Gallup, the Gender-Affirming Letter Access Project. So that was something that I signed up for, and I was doing before that. I just didn't know there was an actual site for it. But it's a pledge for mental health providers to take, just to offer like free or discounted like letter writing services. So part of my goal and my team's goal is to make sure that throughout the year, where if there's somebody who reaches out to us that maybe we don't take their insurance, or they've got financial issues, that we just get them in for that letter assessment for like that 1 or 2 sessions that we need at a pro bono like status, or just at a very like reduced status, to get them moving forward. So for some people it's just a one and done session, and we get the letter done. Usually the turnaround time for that is about a week, just because of the like clients that we see, and time it takes to write letters, because we're constantly writing letters for people, and then they're good to go. So other people, it's if they're looking for like ongoing therapy, we just kind of work with where their comfort's at. So if they're not ready to take that step for HRT or gender confirmation surgeries, or just aren't looking for that, then we just offer that safe space, or give them that time to make that decision for themselves.
Wonderful. I'm thinking of like my own process of getting a letter assessment, and yours sounds so much better. Just like the therapist I saw was fine. He was fine, but it was just very expensive. It was very expensive. I think it ended up costing over $700 by the time it was done, just for like multiple sessions, and then an additional fee for time spent writing the letter. And he was one of the few that like specifically specialized in letter assessments where I was from, and so I felt like I didn't really have much of a choice at the time.
Yeah, and there's a lot of providers that are capitalized on that. And that's something, again, that I think I've learned, and I've tried to like teach my clinicians about too, is we don't want to stop people from living their lives, whether it's about gender identity or if they were trying to access something else. So we were never charging that at all,
Yeah.
the $700. Gosh. But we learned over time, like in the beginning, it was sort of like, okay, well, here's a fee for time. But as we learned, it was, okay, we need to like really like backtrack a little bit, figure out, do we need to really charge people, or can this just be something we just provide for free? And typically it's something that if insurance isn't going to cover it entirely, then we can just do it pro bono out of pocket.
What does it look like to do like a letter assessment session or series of sessions? What sorts of things do you ask, and what does the process kind of look like?
So we try and follow WPATH standards, which is the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. I know that particular organization too. I think it's great to have standards of care versus nothing. I know that in itself, it's been a big topic of conversation with our consultant that could be kind of a form of gatekeeping too, but
Sure.
it's a blueprint that we try and go off of. So the first session that we do when we're preparing to write a letter is we just try and get a big picture background of how do you as an individual understand your gender identity, your gender expression. When did you first start to discover that, whether it was early childhood, adolescence, or adulthood, because people learn about that at different points in life. And then we kind of also get a social transition affirmation background of what steps have you started to take, and then the mental health background too of is there anything you've been struggling with, working on, that we would just need to know about. And because of the WPATH standards, and we don't want to gatekeep too, there's really not a lot that will hold people back from getting their letter. So even if they have an extensive like mental health background, because we've seen clients that have like maybe severe mood swings from bipolar disorder,
Right.
or schizophrenia, where maybe they hear voices or just aren't always in touch with reality. So long as we have those core pieces for basically the diagnosis for the medical side of gender dysphoria, is what the diagnosis is now. I'm not sure what it might be in the future. But as long as we have those criteria pieces, then usually we just move people forward and provide them that letter. We just like to have a big picture initially, and we don't include a lot of that in our letters unless we have a really picky insurance company, which sometimes they want a lot of detail. But we just keep that just in the client file in case providers have any additional questions after they've been referred on. But the letter itself is just focused on, do you meet this criteria? Do they hit the WPATH standards? And it's, they're ready to move forward because they've received the informed consent.
Okay. Yeah, so just what they need, and that's it. Because I know I've seen letters ranging from like a paragraph to multiple pages, and some of that information, the longer it is, I don't know, I get worried because it's like there might be more information that they could use to justify not covering this or not allowing this procedure. So I think that's good to only put what's like absolutely necessary. Before we get back into the video, I wanted to give a quick shout out to our Patreon supporters for the month of August. So a big thank you goes out to Ashiv Yahoo, Vanessa, Riley, Zoe, Sammy, Joy, Jesse, Maddie, Maya, Tara, Bia, Tori, Melody, Melissa, Noble Monster Comics, Casey, Chris, River, Marissa, Kelly, and Jade. Thank you so much for all of your support and for your continued support. If you have not done so already, please be sure to go down to the description below to check out a link to the Patreon, where depending on how much you are able to contribute and support Tipsy and I in our YouTube journey, you can get access to perks like a very inclusive and supportive Discord server. Well, without further ado, let's get back to the video. So, we've kind of touched on working with other providers like healthcare providers, community resources. So I'm wondering, speaking to that a little bit more, how do you integrate like community resources and even families into the work that you do to best meet, transition and coming out needs and things like that?
So it's been a long process. It seems like at this point our resource list for the Western Slope it's just growing and more robust at this point. But it was a lot of legwork in the beginning, because my practice is now, well, as of July of 2021, it's 7 clinicians, including myself. It started out with just me. So it was a lot of like looking into, who's the friendly providers. So actually reaching out to some physicians in the area, or we don't really have a lot of endocrinologists. We had one at one point. So in the past, it was reaching out to those individuals, friendly businesses, just kind of determining like, where are these safe spaces? Where can we refer people? So it was a lot of legwork of just connecting who's available, who's not. And yeah, that list has just kind of grown. And then we receive referrals or recommendations from other community individuals or just other clients that will tell us like, hey, you don't have this person or this business on your list. You should maybe consider them. So as we just get more referrals, we add them.
Okay.
And then to answer your question about families,
Yeah.
we actually incorporate families quite a bit. And usually it's for mostly people under 18.
Right.
So we don't work with a lot of like really little kids. We work with 12 and up typically, that like adolescent age range. So a lot of parents that we encounter, at least here on this side of the state, they're a little bit more socially or politically conservative. So sometimes they're of the mindset of, I don't understand what's going on with my kid. I don't know if I like that they're saying that they're trans or non-binary. But we're here, can you help? Or occasionally we do get those parents that are like, well, can you fix my kid?
Right.
I'm like,
doesn't work like that.
Well, our goal, right, it's not to fix your child is fine. It's a lot of education process. And so I'm sure some therapists have different approaches with families, but at least with the families out here, we've noticed that if we can start working with their kid first, bring in the families a little bit later, and work with families on identifying and validating that, yeah, this is scary for you and you might not understand it, but this is something your kid's going through. Where can we compromise? If there is an ability to compromise, then that's actually shown, at least in our practice, to have a lot of success in parents moving towards the more accepting or supportive direction when they feel like they're not being pushed to just right away accept and validate. We want to work towards that, but we want to see where can you and your child find ways to just make this easier.
Absolutely. And I think that speaks a lot to like being in a place that's more politically conservative. Even if people are apprehensive, they're still coming, which I think is a really good sign that they at least, find your practice and go through the door. And they may not know what's going on or what to do, but it's much better than the alternative we often see, where it's just like, we're not going to get any resources, or we're going to pretend this doesn't exist. So kind of jumping like completely different question. I mean, this is still related to families, but I'm wondering, I know you were involved with PFLAG, I think, as like president of your local chapter for quite some time. So I'm just kind of curious because I think it's super important for providers to, be involved in the community that they serve, outside of just like their individual practice. So I'm wondering, how did you originally get involved in PFLAG, and what was your experience like being a president of the local chapter?
So let's see, we started, my partner and I kind of tossed around the idea of starting some sort of like group, whether it was nonprofit or just support group, and PFLAG seemed like a good, I think, place to start, because we found out had a PFLAG chapter here in Junction back in the 90s, and it got disbanded. We ended up talking to the former chapter president here in town, and I think she mentioned it was disbanded because of like lack of interest and attendance with groups. So we decided, let's maybe see if that's something we can start up again, because after talking to other community leaders and just people in the area, it seemed like that was a big need. And our goal for PFLAG, at least here, was to try and focus it not just on allies, but the LGBTQIA community too. So we had some events that were educational, some that were just focused for like parents or other allies. And then we did have quite a few that were just focused for like teens or young adults who were in the community to give them that safe space to be.
Yeah.
I think, so we had the chapter from 2016 to January of 2020.
Okay.
We had a lot of interest at first. We had some committed board members. We never had any issue with volunteers. The volunteers were always available. It was just people wanting to commit to those board positions, which was the like ultimate like ending of the chapter. At the end, it was just myself and my partner barely, because he didn't have a lot of time to devote to planning or organizing things. So I guess at the end of 2019 was when we both kind of decided we need to hang up the towel on this, because there's just nobody else who can take this on. And with my practice, it was growing at that point. I couldn't really devote the same amount of time to running some of the events or coordinating everything that was needed for the chapter to just sustain.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you did a lot in those years, so that makes sense if people are not jumping up to be on the board. It's like you get people for the events, but for like the big picture stuff, if it's just you, that's a lot to keep up with.
Oh yeah.
Kind of going back into counseling and therapy. I'm wondering if you have any like sort of broad advice that you'd give to people who are considering going to therapy for struggles, issues, concerns related to gender identity, and what do you think they should look for when trying to determine if a gender therapist is a good fit or not?
The first one, I'll go back to Gallup, the Gender-Affirming Letter Acceptance Project, I think is what it stands for. But just checking out that website, I think it's gallup.org, or if you put it into Google, it should come up. And from there, they actually maintain a list of providers across the country. So typically, I want to tell people just that might be watching your channel, you're going to have to probably find a provider that's located in your state,
Right.
because if you find someone out of state, they're probably not licensed to see you. You never know, but typically it's best to find somebody in your state. And that list should give you an idea if there's anyone in your state, even if they're hours away. If they can do teletherapy, then they can still get you your letter. The second piece I would say is just kind of vetting maybe your therapist a little bit too, to get an idea of like how long that process might take. Fees, I mean, that's a part of, I think, the conversation too, is discussing fees. So if they're charging like a astronomical rate for a letter telling you have to be in counseling for a certain amount of time, then they're probably not on the up and up. They're probably not following WPATH, or they're just maybe not very informed about how to get you going, because really you can do just one session and get somebody in and out and referred on.
Yeah.
So I think those would be the biggest pieces. And of course, if you find providers that advertise that, they themselves identify within the community, or that they, just work with specific populations and have that like expertise or knowledge, I think that could be a good indicator that maybe you're going to find somebody and connect with them and get your needs met.
I've heard just horror stories of people reaching out to counselors, and then, later on through the relationship, they find out like, oh, this provider is not going to write me a letter. So, one thing I've heard that can be important too is just like being very upfront with the therapist of like what you're looking for. Like, it's like, do you want to be in a long-term therapeutic relationship, or do you just want a letter? And both are fine. But I've heard, I just know too many people have kind of been like under the assumption that the provider would write a letter, and then it can turn into like a huge time and money sink. But what sort of advice would you give to, partners, parents, family members of somebody who has come out or is in the process of coming out and transitioning? What advice would you give to kind of help them on that process of being supportive of their loved one? I mean, I know we kind of touched a little bit on this in terms of like integrating them at some point into the, process of therapy, especially if they're minors. But I'm wondering if there's any just broad advice that you would give.
I would I would say like before you even do any research, because that's going to be my second step, is to do some research. But before you get to that point, if you're finding yourself having any like visceral negative reactions, just to try and check in with yourself, and if you need to, like, take some space, but come back to that individual and realize that that's a big step that they took in coming out to you.
Yeah.
It's not easy for people to say, this is who I am, and I want you to know this about myself, because for a lot of people, it could mean they no longer have that friend or family member, or they're going to be kicked out of their home, they're not going to have a partner. So it's really anxiety inducing. So for those partners, families, friends out there, just give yourself a second to kind of breathe and realize that it's not about you in that moment, it's about that person. So try and be validating, even if you're not ready to accept right then and there. Just acknowledge that this was a big thing. This is kind of a shock. But I want to work through this with you. I want to figure out how we can be supportive and how we can offer acceptance. And then the next piece would be just to check out I always recommend the .org sites, like genderspectrum.org. There's always pflag.org, GLAAD with 2 A's, GLAAD. So any of those are going to have a lot of like empirical like research of, we've done studies, we have statistics, we've got different articles about whether it's sexuality, gender, allies, you name it. You'll be able to find some information there about maybe what you're going through as the support person.
Yeah, wonderful. And
then just get into therapy if you can find someone who is, an affirming therapist for both of you.
I think that last part is definitely needed, because it's a transition for everyone. So I think, exactly, having that safe space for, the parents, partners, other family members, friends, whoever it may be, just to process what that's like is important too, and being able to do it in a space where it doesn't negatively impact their loved one. And kind of my last question, wonder like what sort of advice or recommendations would you have for mental health providers who, I had written down like who want to work with gender diverse clients, but I would imagine like just statistically, most if not all mental health providers will eventually work with at least one trans or non-binary client at some point. So I'm wondering like any recommendations that you'd provide for providers in terms of providing affirmative practice.
I think my biggest suggestion would be to just do some initial research, again going back to those like .org sites even for them, and seeking out some individuals, maybe other providers, whether it's medical or mental health, that are of lived experience. Because so many times I hear from our clients where they're like, well, I had to educate my doctor on like what it means to be transgender, and I'm like, that shouldn't even be happening. Just as much as I don't want to educate people on being mixed or Black, because my experience is just my own, you shouldn't have to do that either. So that would be my suggestion to providers, is even checking out like a channel like yours. If they're like, I don't have the funds or the extra money to pay for, a consultant, check out YouTube channels, like, find those groups. There's a lot of groups. I know Facebook, I think, is one of those social medias that might be being phased out by, I think, Gen Z and a lot of other generations, but they've got a lot of, I think, great groups available. So even resources like that, joining a Facebook group where even if you don't want to say anything, just hang back, check out like what resources they have available, is going to be a major step and a game changer. So doing your own work would be my recommendation. And if you've got like initial biases, you're very strong on like, well, I feel this way and I think the client or my patient should do this, then that's a good indicator of maybe you want to stop and check what's going on
take
there
a step
and
back.
really assess, is that something that's coming from you or is going to be beneficial for that person?
Thank you again, Devin, for taking the time to be here. This has been wonderful. I mean, I feel like I personally have learned a lot and benefited from this. So I'm hoping that, all my audience will definitely have a lot to take away from this too. If anyone wants to find out more about you and the work you do, is there any website or place that they should go just to find out more about you?
So, I mean, they can check us out on our website. It's identityinsightsgroup.com. And then I try and keep active with just a couple social medias, but I think I've told you, I'm not looking to like do a lot of influencing stuff, but if you want to check out my silly reels on Instagram, you can definitely do that. I think it's just under my name, Devin Pinkston or Identity Insights. And we've got a Facebook page too. And that's about it for social media.
And as always, thank you so much to all of you for watching. My wonderful cat Tipsy and I love you all and hope you're staying safe and sound. If you have not done so already, please be sure to give this a huge thumbs up and hit that subscribe button and notification bell. All right, bye for now.